Hello, fam. It's your girl, Natalie, the Keto Bikini Pro, and we're back with a Keto Bikini Masterclass. It has been a while since I've actually done a brand new live masterclass, so I'm super excited to be back with a topic I think will rock your world and change, hopefully, the way that you think about and see food, macros, nutrition, hopefully help to calm some of the fears that many people have around carbs, or some of you have around fats, the fear of particular foods or particular macros making you fat or making you gain weight. Here to share a method that I created, actually finally calling it a method after many years, I suppose, teaching it. And this is what is known as my Seesaw Method, something we talk about inside the Academy. This was actually a request by one of the members of our Academy, one of our newer members, to explain the Seesaw Method and how to use it a little bit more deeply, and asked me if I had a masterclass on it. And I did not yet. So now I will. So I'm excited to get this class into the bank of classes. I don't even know how many we have now, but I still have many masterclasses that are hidden on YouTube that are unlisted. So it is my goal over 2026 to release all of the previously unlisted masterclasses into the public realm, so that you can find anything by searching my channel. So along with this one, I'm going to drop some previously recorded masterclasses that relate to this topic in the description box. I'll put all of the links to the other related masterclasses that I mentioned here into the description of the video. Any of those that were previously unlisted, I will now make public. And then I'll continue to do that as we go with our new masterclasses from here on out. So cheers. Cheers to Monday, cheers to a new masterclass, and cheers to the holidays. All right, let's see. We got some ladies on here live with me tonight. Welcome, Lisa. Kristen is here. Diane is here. Mary Grace is here. Awesome. If you are on the live, drop me drop me a comment. Let me know that you're on with us live. And if you have any questions throughout this masterclass about this topic, related to this topic, drop it below in the comments, and we will keep the conversation going. We will make it more of a conversation and not just me talking at you. Yay, Erin is on. She says, one of my favorite topics. Yes, indeed. Bubbles, Karen is on. Keto Warrior is on. Ida is on. Hello, welcome. So glad to have you here live with us. Okay. Stephanie. Yes, Stephanie H is on with us. Lovely, lovely. I love it. Celeste is on. Okay, ladies, I see y'all showing up on this Monday night, 1 week out from Christmas week. By the way, I'll go ahead and mention now, I'm planning to do my next live Q&A, live chat, ask me anything next week for Christmas week. We'll do kind of a special holiday special, ask me anything. I was going to do that tonight, but I didn't give you all a chance to submit any questions in advance. So I'll drop a question box in my Instagram this week, or a few times in my Instagram stories this week. I'll drop one, a post in the Facebook group, and of course, always in the Academy, you're welcome to submit questions for Q&As. So I will actually gather some questions from y'all, let you know that it's happening, and we'll plan on that for next Monday, the 22nd, I believe. Yes, the 22nd. Awesome. Cool. Okay, so what the heck is this Seesaw Method? What am I talking about? Really, I'm talking about macros, nutrition, how to really, what I think that this method will provide for you is really a way to think about foods and think about macros so that even if you're not tracking macros, and I always say my goal for everyone is to not have to track macros for the rest of your life. It should be a tool for you to learn about nutrition, learn what's in foods, learn how to put together a plate, right? And get to a point where you are able to make these decisions in your day-to-day life without having to track every single gram. Now, if you have a particular goal you're trying to work towards, you're trying to get a massive body transformation or build muscle, particularly really focusing on building muscle, and you have specific goals and you have timelines, or you have, you want to compete, or you are in a fat loss phase and you want to make sure that you are doing things properly along the way and adjusting along the way, and all of those things that we teach inside the academy, then I think when you have a goal is when you need to be tracking, because what we don't know, we can't change. But generally for life and for the rest of your life, I want you to be able to think about it, make an educated decision, an informed decision about how to put together a plate or a meal or a day of eating without always having to put everything in the tracker. So that's what this topic is all about today. The seesaw is really the energy seesaw. And this is how I'm going to share a screenshot in a moment of a section, a page of our Academy and Nutrition overview. This is the overview that new members get when they first sign up. There's a video with me explaining this and this document. What I call this is the energy seesaw, carbs and fats. Protein is technically on the seesaw as well. It's a very important part of the seesaw, in fact. So we're going to talk about macros, protein, carbs, and fats, but particularly carbs and fats. So first, let me just kind of set the stage with some background of really what the purpose of tonight's class is all about. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of arguing on social media. Nothing new there, right? Always arguing on social media. But currently, there's this carbs versus fats debate. And that seems to have been, really kind of popping up every time there's a new trend, which happens pretty frequently every, 10 or 20 years or so. So, I grew up 80s, 90s, early 2000s with low fat diets. My mother did low fat diets, right? Most of us, if you lived through the 70s, 80s, 90s, you lived in the low fat diet era. Maybe the 2010s, 2000s, 2010s is where low carb started having a moment, and keto had a moment, and carnivore had a moment. And all these low carb diets, have really had their 15 minutes of fame, or hopefully last longer than that. But when something new, like when keto first came on the scene, when paleo first came on the scene, of course, there's always these naysayers. And so you end up with this back and forth. And now you have a lot of chatter about low fat all of a sudden again. It's just coming back up. I think it's because of people who are rediscovering carbs and discovering essentially what I'm about to teach here, which is if you're going to add carbs into your diet, you're going to have to pull back on your dietary fats if you want to maintain weight loss, optimal body composition, all of those things. Essentially, the main problem that we have in society today, most sick, fat, unhealthy people have a broken seesaw. Both ends of the seesaw are up. And if you ever remember a seesaw as a child, playing on the seesaw, one end is up, the other end has to be down, and vice versa, or balanced. But if both ends of the seesaw are up, that is a broken seesaw. And that is what we have in our society today. Most people who are metabolically unhealthy, overweight, over fat, under muscled, are eating too much carbs and fats and not enough protein. If you think about what is in essentially any hyper palatable, highly processed food today, you're going to find lots of fats and lots of carbs together, usually also with a chemical soup of other additives as well that don't help the situation. So most people are over consuming high fat and high carb foods and under consuming protein. On top of that, we have an issue of lack of activity, and I really would call it lack of intentional movement. So lack of strength training, lack of the kind of exercise that builds muscle, if there's exercise at all, and or in the context of a sedentary lifestyle. Now you end up with all of the metabolic issues and poor body composition, not the kind of body composition that we want. Too much fat, not enough muscle. So now I'm seeing this argument between low fat, low carb again for fat loss, muscle building, and long-term health and sustainability. Which one's better? Which one's better? Well, what I will say is I've always been non-dogmatic as a coach. I meet you where you are. I don't think one size fits all. I don't think every single person should be doing the same exact thing. But there are certain principles that if we follow certain principles, we can optimize our body composition and our health. Now, I'm not here on tonight's masterclass to advocate for why I believe the grand majority of the population would do much better with either a balance or a high fat, low carb diet lifestyle. That is what I believe. That is who I work with. People who want to optimize within balance or on the high fat, low carb spectrum. And that is because it's what I believe is the most healthy for humans, all humans. Now, where somebody falls within that spectrum is very nuanced. But I do not advocate for high carb, low fat diets, really even on a short-term basis. Perhaps you could do it on a short-term basis for a particular goal, but I do not advocate that as a lifestyle for the grand majority of the population. I think it has done a disservice to a generation or multiple generations of women, in fact. Our mothers, my mother's generations, the boomers and Gen X, and then some of us millennials caught that on the back end as well. So let's see. So this concept of the seesaw and really understanding what this all boils down to is understanding how fats and carbs work in your body, how they are different from protein, why I don't want you just thinking about calories, because different macronutrients, and really even within that, we're not going to get into all the micronutrients and the particular foods on this masterclass, but some related masterclasses that I am going to release publicly about food selection and carb tolerance. Food selection is where we focus on the health aspects. You can be healthy. You can eat healthy with any macros. You can eat unhealthy with any macros. The macronutrient distribution of your diet does not determine the health of the foods you are eating within those macros. You could eat a high protein, low carb, high fat diet and be doing nothing but protein shakes and keto treats. That would not be a healthy diet. And you certainly could do that on the other end of the spectrum as well. So we're not going to get into what is a healthier way to implement these macros. We're going to focus on the macros tonight. But the beauty of this concept of understanding how fats and carbs work in the body and how they work together along with protein, you will always be able to make a solid decision about how to put together your meals, your day of eating, so that you can balance them out appropriately for your goals. That's the whole key. And you can even course correct if you go off plan or indulge a little, especially early in the day. Then you can learn how to course correct pretty quickly. I've done this during preps before, where I had a snack I didn't intend to eat that day. It was not on my intended meal plan for the day. And then I'm able to fix the macros and make the macros work out by the end of the night. Now, my little disclaimer here, since I'm not going into the micros and the food selection, is it's not going to benefit you to be using protein powder and packaged snacks to figure things out, to make things fit your macros. Ideally, you're doing all of this with real, whole, natural, nutrient-dense foods. But understanding these concepts will also help you understand how you can incorporate indulgences here and there, even daily. I do it with dark chocolate, but different things. I might have different indulgences here and there, and still be able to work them into the macros and work them into the plan. Whether that be one day I use the Seesaw to have a little bit more carbs and less fats. So that's really the concept. So let's dive into that piece. What do I mean by the Seesaw? And really get into that. Okay. So All right. I will just quickly show you this little image here. Oops. Hold on. How do I do that? Oh, what did I do? I turned off my video. I meant to share my screen. Okay. Is this it? Nope, that's not it. There it is. All right. So here's a page from our nutrition overview. And this is the main concept here. Here's our Seesaw. And this page is where I'm really discussing how to hit your macros. So once we set some macros for our ladies in the academy, this is how I want them thinking about their macros. So protein. Protein is the base of the Seesaw. You need to hit your protein intake daily. That is the main goal when we are talking about, especially when we're talking about body composition goals. If we have goals of building muscle and losing body fat or burning body fat, one or the other or both, recomp, basically trying to change the shape of our bodies and change the composition of our bodies, protein is key. Protein stays constant. We don't trade protein for carbs or for fats. Earlier in this document, I talked about trade-offs. Where is the trade-offs? Everything is a trade-off, the art of flexible dieting. So the reason why this Seesaw is important to understand is that the only diet that will work for you long-term is the one you can stick to. So when we understand macros and how they work, this is the part I shared here. It creates the ability to be flexible with your choices. So you can create more sustainability in your diet by things like including indulgences here and there without feeling that all or nothing, oh, now I ate something off plan, so I might as well be off plan the rest of the week or the rest of the day. And then blow it and make it a whole lot worse, right? that's in here too. They're talking about the all or nothing mentality. Let go of the all or nothing thinking around food. So the key to macros in general is understanding that everything is a trade-off. Macros, the whole concept of tracking macros came it was called flexible dieting. Dr. Joe Klemczewski coined that term, 30 years or so ago. Because bodybuilders used to only have meal plans. It was like, you get a meal plan from a coach, this is what to eat. And he started thinking about, well, what if I want whitefish instead of chicken? Or what if I want turkey instead of fish? Can't I swap out this protein source for a different one? And then that's where this whole concept of flexible dieting came in, and that's where macros came in. If we look at foods that have a certain macronutrient breakdown, we can swap them out in our day, in our meals, in our meal plans, and still get basically the same macronutrient breakdown for the total day. And we can reach our goals doing that without needing to be so strict, only eating these particular foods that our coach told us were okay. Now, with that being said, this piece right here is the spectrum. I like to talk about the fact that all foods exist on a spectrum. We have most optimal to, let's say, most detrimental. Foods that are doing nothing for you health-wise, that may do something for you emotionally, socially, mentally, which may actually be a good or a bad thing, depending. But then everything's on a spectrum. So considering the health aspect of foods as well, this is why I say you could, if it fits your macros, which became a whole thing a little while back, this concept of FIIFYM, where people were fitting in all kinds of junk food and putting protein powder in it, and now all of a sudden they can still hit their macros. That's not what I mean when I say, this flexibility. We want flexibility to not only be eating whitefish and asparagus all the time, that there are lots of other nutrient-dense whole foods we can be consuming that equal those same macros. But the macros do change. The macros change food to food. So certain foods have more micronutrients or different makeup of micronutrients than others. So the simple way to understand the macros piece of it is that, well, let's first back up and just say macros, this is a good way to think about it. Macros are for body composition. Food selection is for health, as I've pretty much already beaten that dead horse here. But if you're thinking about when you start tracking macros, you recognize that everything is a trade-off because you essentially have this bank account of macros. And if let's say you are doing a ketogenic diet, your carbs are set at 25 for the whole day total, and you use all of those up with bread for breakfast. Well, that's going to have implications. Not only do you now have the rest of the day where nothing can have any carbs for you to still hit your macros, but also that bread may have sent you on a blood sugar roller coaster. It may create symptoms. It may create all kinds of other issues when we just stack all of our carbs into one meal like that. So this is kind of backing up the whole concept of macros before we specifically get to the seesaw. But essentially, you can think of your macros as your budget. And many of you who've ever counted calories have likely done this with your calories. You have a calorie budget, and if you're using, and this was what Weight Watchers, right? This is the way Weight Watchers does it with the point system. And I believe their point system is entirely based on calories. Well, when you understand macros, you don't have to worry about the calories. In fact, I don't want you focused on the calories because that's where you end up with a broken seesaw. Because you end up trading protein, which does not do the same thing in the body that carbs and fats do. So let's talk about that. Protein is the base of the seesaw because it is the foundation. Protein literally builds the amino acids you get from the proteins you eat, build your entire body. Everything in your body is made up of protein. We need protein not just for building, the aesthetic muscle, but all of our musculoskeletal system, our bones, our tissues, our organs, our cells. So everything is made up of protein. Our entire bodies need protein. So this is why protein is not negotiable. That is the seesaw. So keep that base strong. Don't let that base of the seesaw break. Then we get to our carbs and fats. Carbs and fats act differently in the body than protein does. Carbs and fats are our energy source. It is where we exogenously take food in and it gets converted into energy in our body so that our bodies can use it for fuel. So these are our energy sources. Since protein is not an energy source, eating more protein doesn't give us more energy. Eating more protein helps with recovery from training because it's building up the tissues that we broke down in our training, for example. But it is not where we get our energy from. This is actually one of the arguments I see in the high carb, advocates saying that keto is bad for you long term because you have to use protein for energy on keto. No, you do not, because you're using fats as your energy source on keto. I don't know where this concept of needing to use protein for energy when you have an energy source comes from, other than the fact that I think a lot of those folks do not acknowledge or even recognize that fat is an energy source, just like carbs are an energy source. But this is the most important thing to understand, is that you get energy from carbs or fats or both. So they act the same in the body. In this way, they have a similar role in the body to provide energy. Now, here's a key concept. I think y'all get this with the seesaw. I'm going to stop sharing this now. Okay, here's a key concept to understand. When your fats are high and your carbs are high, there's a bit of a competing energy source here. There is an oxidative priority that happens in the body. So it's what our body oxidizes first and utilizes first. Burns first is a good way to think about it. What is going to get burned first? If carbs and fats are both present together, carbs will be burned first, prioritized first. And the fats that you eat alongside those carbs, or let's say within the same day, for example, if you are eating in an energy surplus, meaning you're eating more fuel from food than your body needs to function, then the fats you are eating are going to get stored as body fat. So this is what's happening in the grand majority of the population that are eating too much carbs and fats and low protein. They're broken seesaw. Even if they were to eat enough protein and still overconsume carbs and fats, this is where body fat comes from. Because all of this energy needs to go somewhere. It needs to be used, or the body will store it for later. And it gets stored away in the fat cells. So, and if you want to get geeky and go into the science on it, look up the Randall cycle. I'm not going to get into all the science here, but just understand. I'm not saying you can never have French fries again or a baked potato with butter on it, but that's an example of carbs and fats together, right? The reason why it's not that you can't have that ever is that if you're not over consuming, it's not likely to be an issue. Where it becomes an issue is with overconsumption, because now we have excess and it gets stored as body fat. We can have excess carbs, we can have excess fats without having the other one, or we can have excess of both. And in any case, if we have excess, it will get stored as body fat if we are not active enough to utilize all of that fuel for our body's functions throughout the day. So this is where the sedentary lifestyle comes in. So the way that you can think about this is, and I said in the context of a keto diet, you can utilize this seesaw just as much as a person who may be, let's say, my favorite, paleo, super balanced. I don't know if that's my favorite anymore because I don't do a lot of veggies these days, but I do love a good paleo lifestyle. Okay, so the key is you don't want high carbs and or fats too high in excess, and you certainly don't want your protein too low. So let's see. That's all I wanted to share from that piece. Yes, I closed that so I don't get confused here. So think of carbs and fats as your energy sources, protein as your building blocks. All right. I don't even need to go into all of that either. Good. I didn't want to completely be redundant with what I shared in the past masterclass. So I was just taking a look at those notes. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of the seesaw then. Let's say you're pretty much carnivore for the most part, right? Your carbs are like 10 grams or less all the time, and then your protein is nice and high because you're working on building muscle, and maybe you're doing a 1-to-1 protein to fat on your carnivore diet with very, very practically no carbs. Let's say there's a special occasion and you have an opportunity to indulge in some carbs. I was going to say French fries because that's one of the first things I think of when I think of indulging with carbs, but that does carry with it some fats. But we can still use that as an example. Let's say you're going to get your regular burger without a bun, the way you always get it, or however many patties, like when we go to Five Guys. But this time you want to get fries. All right. You have some things to think about. Either if this special event, special occasion is coming up, it hasn't happened yet, and you can plan ahead. This is the best situation to be in. You can plan ahead. You can plan for a leaner day throughout the day so that you can trade some of your fats for carbs. This is where the seesaw concept comes in. So even in the context of a carnivore diet, if you decide one day you want to have some more carbs for whatever reason, you can plan ahead and you can trade fats for those carbs. So where you would typically be super high fat, very, very low carb, you're going to take a little bit from your fat budget, allocate it to this one time, one meal, one day carb budget, and slightly tilt the seesaw a little bit. Probably not totally balanced, certainly not the total other direction, but just going to slightly lower that fat and bring up those carbs. What does that look like? Here's the simple formula. And the reason why so many people and so many trainers are going to tell you that high carb and low fat is the way to go is because fat carries twice as much energy as carbs. It's a 2-for-1. That's the way to think about it. You get twice as much energy from the same amount of fats as you would from carbs. What do I mean by that? 10 grams of fat. We're going to have to bring the calories in here, y'all. Sorry. But 10 grams of fat is equal to 90 calories, right? 10 grams of carbs is equal to 40 calories. So it's not a perfect 2 to 1, but it's very, very close. 40 times 2 is 80. So, 90 divided by 2 is 45. So basically you can think of it like a 2 to 1. That's the easiest way to do it without having to get out a calculator. So if you want to have an additional 20 carbs to fit in those French fries, then you would take your fats and you would trade 10 grams of fats for 20 grams of carbs. Because 20 grams of carbs times 4 is 80. That's 80 calories. 10 grams of fat is 90. Times 9 is 90 calories. So how I got to that is that each gram of fat has 9 calories. Each gram of carbs has 4 calories. And this is why, people will say, oh, you get to have more carbs for less calories, and that's why you should do high carb. It's very rudimentary, and I don't agree with that, but because as long as you are balancing your intake, it doesn't really matter which one has more calories in terms of what diet is better. You can regulate your fats. In fact, fats are much more dense, so carbs are more voluminous. So it's one of the reasons why I don't feel good eating eating as much carbs. If you're balancing it, this is a really cool thing to try. I'm going to tell you in a second who is a good candidate for this and who is not. But it's a really cool thing to try because what you'll understand, what you'll notice is that because fats are very energy dense, 10 grams of fat is a very small amount, like volume wise. 1 tablespoon of an oil, a fat that you cook with, beef tallow, whatever, that's like 13, 14, so anywhere between 12 to 15 grams, 1 tablespoon. So now we're talking over 100 calories for 1 tablespoon of an oil versus, I'm trying to remember now, I'm trying to think of how much sweet potato that might be. Let me plug that in so I can give you like a visual. Mary Grace could probably tell me because she's been the sweet potato queen lately. But let's say we wanted to do 20 grams of carbs from sweet potatoes. That would look like, wow, it's like 3.5 ounces. Yeah. So about 100 grams of sweet potato, which is 3.5 ounces. Probably about this size sweet potato, which would probably be about maybe a half of a medium sweet potato. Let's see what Chronometer says. A medium sweet potato. 1 medium sweet potato, a whole medium sweet potato would be 30 grams of carbs. So half of a large sweet potato would be that 20 grams. That's a lot more volume than what you'd get for, and that's only 80 calories, right? So that's like what, half a tablespoon of oil would be the equivalent. So if you think about it like that, it's a lot more food for the, because it's less calorie dense with more food. And so that's where a lot of bodybuilders lean into, is that they want more volume in their meals. So, hey, all of you volume eaters, if you're struggling on keto carnivore because you're missing the volume in your food and you are metabolically healthy, you're not concerned about your blood sugar, you don't have concerns about blood sugar, and you are not concerned about your relationship with food, you have a healthy relationship with food, then adding in some carbs and pulling back on your fats might be a good idea for you. However, I'll say in most cases, when somebody says that they're a volume eater, what they really mean is that they are a binge eater. And I could do a whole other class about that. I'm not even going to get into that right now, but I think there's much more mindset work that needs to be done there. And you can bulk up your meals as much as you want, but there's a food behavior issue that needs to be addressed. So that's a topic for another day. Maybe we should do a whole masterclass on volume eating. But okay, so let's see. Getting back to who is a good candidate for it, for utilizing the seesaw? How and when, right? Who, how, and when. So, like I said, if you are metabolically unhealthy, if you have poor blood sugar regulation, meaning you have these spikes and drops, you're dealing with hypoglycemia, you're dealing with reactive hypoglycemia, you have all these symptoms related to blood sugar dysregulation, and that's the whole reason why you're doing a keto or carnivore diet, low carb diet, then maybe we don't play with the carbs just yet. We keep our carbs pretty consistent. If you are not fat adapted, so you're new to keto carnivore and you're doing it for a particular reason, why you want to stick with, you want to go high fat and lower carb, or low carb or keto carnivore levels of carbs for a particular reason, cognitively, health-wise, or because if you eat a strawberry or a piece of sweet potato and it makes you want to eat all the pies, and you are not yet in the place where you can separate healthy carbs from junk food because of a relationship with food issue, this is not for you. Okay, so deal with those things first. Let's see. For those who would be good candidates, you are healthy, you are fit, lean, you have reached your body composition goals, at least let's say that first goal. Now maybe you're ready to work on more advanced goals, but you are not dealing with blood sugar issues, cognitive issues that require, those ketones to the brain. Let's see. You're not binge eating. You don't have a poor relationship with food. In those situations, now we can start playing with carbs. This is where you can implement this a few different ways. You can essentially keep your total intake, caloric or energy intake, roughly the same to, let's say, you're in a deficit for fat loss. You can keep your caloric intake the same, but it allows you some more flexibility day to day, week to week, when you want it or when you need it, when you're feeling the need or the desire to have more carbs, lower fat, or vice versa. Erin, for example, she said this is her favorite topic. Erin, for example, we've got our carbs higher, we've got our fats lower right now. She also has times where she wants more fat. She can use this the opposite direction. So wherever you are sitting already on the spectrum, whether you're already following, let's say, paleo, balanced, carbs and fats diet, you're on a higher carb, lower fat diet, or a higher fat, lower carb diet, you can trade in any of those situations. I like to use the seesaw intermittently based on a particular day or life social event or an opportunity here and there. That's how I like to use the seesaw. You can also, though, use it more consistently. You can actually build into your plan higher carb, lower fat days and higher fat, lower carb days. This is similar to carb cycling, but carb cycling is really more done for changing your overall intake by increasing and decreasing carbs. So in that case, it's not the same thing as using the seesaw. So it's not truly cycling in that regard, because typically carb cycling, and then in the context of keto, fat cycling is a calorie cycle as well. You're having higher and lower total intake days. But with the Seesaw, your intake remains the same, but you just play with the breakdown of your macros on those days. I like to use, like I said, if there may be a time where I indulge in something I didn't plan on, then I just naturally do the Seesaw to adjust for the day. If it would actually throw me outside of one of my macros, let's say I get a really fancy chocolate that I want to try, and I try that and the carbs are much higher, and that actually would put me over my carbs for the day. And maybe that's, I'm looking at the rest of my day and I don't want to take away carbs from later in the day, but I'm okay with taking away some fat. Or maybe it's easier to take away some fat because I've already built in drizzling olive oil over my dinner. And that would be an easy thing to remove rather than, let's say I'd planned on having carrots or winter squash with my dinner, and I still want to have those, and those are going to end up with that extra chocolate. The carbs are going to end up being too high, so I can take out that olive oil, and now my fats will be lower and I can keep my energy intake about the same. Let's see. What else do I need to say about this, really? Do y'all have questions about how to utilize the Seesaw, when to utilize the Seesaw? The math. The tricky thing, the thing that trips people up sometimes is the math. But if you just remember that fats are twice as much energy as carbs, and we are trying to maintain the same energy level, we need to decrease the fat if we're going to increase the carbs. And if we do that, we're doing it in a 2-to-1 ratio, and vice versa. Maybe I can give some other examples for the math part. Let's see. What would be another good example? Avocado has both fats and carbs. I was going to say, what am I having for dinner? But y'all, today was day 1 of my prep. And I have been living on carnivore snacks today. Thank goodness I bought a whole bunch of them on Black Friday deal, because I did not have any food. I did not have time to go to the grocery store. And then I didn't have time to prep dinner before I did the masterclass. So it was just like carnivore snacks for breakfast, carnivore snacks for lunch, carnivore snacks for dinner. What I love about those, I just told y'all not to have snacks as your main meals, but carnivore snacks are just steak. So it's just dehydrated steak. So I have no problem replacing my meals with carnivore snacks. Basically, like I've been eating, what did I start with? Top round. I think I finished the top round this morning, and then New York strip. So all steak all day. I did have one protein yogurt as well. But let's see. Let's see about other math. Let's say you wanted to trade. You could trade a higher fat ground beef, like an 80-20, for a 85-15 or 90-10. And then you could add in something I love to do, adding in carrots or sweet potatoes or winter squash into my beef bowl. So instead of just having ground beef in my bowl, I would also add in a carb source. And now it's bulked up the meal. There's more volume, changes the flavor profile a little bit. But if I'm doing that, then I might use a leaner ground beef. Or a lot of the time with my beef bowls, I like to add yogurt and drizzle olive oil over that. And my I use coconut yogurt, so that's high fat. So I might pull back on how much of that I use or pull it out entirely if I want to add carbs to it. So that's just kind of a more practical way to think about it without worrying so much about the math. But this is where, because I always tell y'all in the academy not to focus on the calories, but focus on the macros. This is a time when it may be beneficial to glance at your calories, because if you plug it in and you want to see, well, is it a good swap? Was this a good swap? Did I do the math correctly? Did I swap the appropriate fat for carbs to get the math right? Glance at your calories, and if it's still the same, roughly the same, let's say within 50 calories, 100 calories of your normal, then you did the math correctly. Where that might get tricky is that sometimes these apps, already the calories are off and it's not really matching with the macros. So that's kind of annoying. That's where you're going to have to remember 2 to 1. So you can have 2 extra carbs for each 1 gram of fat that you trade. Trade 1 gram of fat for 2 grams of carbs, and vice versa. So, hope that helps. Let me know if you have tried this before, if it's worked for you. If you have more questions about it, this replay will stay up. So feel free to drop a question in the comments. If you have a follow-up question, I'll add follow-up questions to my live chat next week. Ask me anything, and we can dive deeper if you are confused about any of it. But does anybody think you're going to give this a try? Have you tried it before? And if not, will you give it a try? Let me know. I think that's it. We have a quiet chat tonight. So I'm going to head out, call it a night. I hope you all have a wonderful week. And I look forward to seeing your questions for next week. And we can just hang out and chat for Christmas. All right. Happy holidays to everyone. See you next week. Bye.